Okay, hello. Some 12 or 15 years ago, a great friend of mine introduced me for the first time to the open source. I didn't know much about it, as probably most of us here today don't know too much about the open source. However, that was a changing event for myself, and it changed many of the ways I think about software, computers, privacy, and collaboration. So today we are going to take you a little bit through that journey, and hopefully you could have a better understanding, and hopefully you could adopt also open source in your life. But before we get into that, I want to share a little bit about me. My name is Enrique Barcelli. I'm an entrepreneur, and I've been introduced to computers very early in my life, and I want to know a little bit about you, and I also want to check how are you receiving this signal from us. So the first things we will do is try to get some polls from you and ask you about the quality of the audio and the video you are receiving from me. So you should be getting soon in your screen some question about the quality of the signal of first about the audio signal. Let's wait for some responses. Okay. All right. The next question is about the quality of the video you are getting. So whether you can see this video properly. Okay. And finally, okay, then we go to what we came to discuss today, to talk, which is about the open source. So let me introduce you to the open source story. So the first question that many times come to us is about what is the open source. So we go through what the open source is. They will tell you a little bit about our own story in relation to the open source, and we'll try to explain what this could be for you in the open source as well. So to see what are the benefits of adopting these concepts, and how we can help you, how you could get to take advantage of this technology, and of course at the end some questions and answers. Okay, let's move on. So first, what is the open source? Then we need to go a little bit back in history. The open source, it's actually a very old concept. We probably in the beginning of humanity, every time we started to develop something, we collaborate among us. So the first humans who discover the fire or discover how to use the wheel, they were not thinking about the royalties they were going to charge on everybody who used a wheel after them. On the contrary, they come up with an idea which was improved by the next person who used it, and over centuries and millennia, we keep accumulating this knowledge and these technologies that we use today. So jumping a few millennia from the wheel to our days, the story, it was not very different for computers or software. It was in the 50s and the 60s where the computers started to become more prominent in human society. And at that time, normally the manufacturers of computers, they will create the software to be used with these computers, and they will give you these programs or the instruction about how to use the machines along with the products. So you could use this basic program language or these basic programs, and you could modify them in any way you wanted. So the fundamental product was the computer, the physical item, and you could program whatever sets of instructions you wanted. So that was the beginning of computing. But then among the community of computer scientists, they started to notice that there was going to be some space for pure software, and they started to become a little bit concerned that the potential actors in the space of software could use this new concept in a very powerful way to strip out freedom from people. So there was the whole concept of the whole open source movement actually started out of this trust from the technology and the computer scientists, from what the big corporations or governments could do with the power to read our data, to store our data, or to give us pieces of software that we would use without knowing what they were doing. That was because in the 70s, the initial idea of providing machines and the ability to program them started to shift to some people giving you programs that were already compiled, let's say they were closed, and we couldn't know what these programs were actually doing. So what we could see on the surface, what these programs deliver to us, we couldn't see what they were actually doing in the background. And we're talking about the 70s. Many years later, we've seen that they were not so wrong actually. And then we saw some of these corporations, government, and people and hackers who have abused software that they give to users, and these users have been stripped of their private information, or they have been, some secrets have been stolen, or they keep scanning your computer and taking your data, send it to somewhere else. So they were not absolutely wrong. So what is all this freedom in the open source? So the concept is that we collaborate and we provide software, or we provide a computer program, but I provide you every single instruction, every single line of code, so you could use it, read it yourself, and see what it actually does. And you can also copy it, you can also redistribute it, so you can have many copies of this. You can also send it to somebody else. You can send it to someone. You can freely modify it. You can use it in one computer, in another computer, in one operating system, in a different operating system. We cannot be locked into something that you cannot see, or you cannot be locked into a specific platform. That was the inspiration that these people have in the 70s around this freedom. Then the concept evolved a lot, because then the concept was not only applied to computers and software, but it was also applied to all kinds of technologies and collaboration. And today we use the open source, which means openly sharing everything we're doing in biotechnology, in environmental, if we want to, in engineering, in medical science, in absolutely almost every field of development where people want to collaborate, there is a lot of scientists or people interested in that prefer to do the research, prefer to do the collaboration in a way that is transparent, that is not overly influenced by any body, right? And that can later can be used not only by them, but by absolutely everyone in the world. Yeah? So that was the story behind how we got to open source. Okay, so with regard to the software in itself, they started to develop many different types of applications using these concepts for almost every single use we could think of. Of course, one of the main initial pieces of software that came under this concept of open source was the Linux kernel. It's not the first, it's not the only one. There are many others, but that was one of the critical pieces which enable to have an operating system that we can run on almost any hardware, and it's a standard, it's free, it's open, we all know what it does, so we can install it on PCs, we can install it on servers, we can install it on mobile phones, we can install it on printers, we can install it on almost everything, and it's a fundamental building block so that everything else can work. There are databases, very powerful databases, which are engines that help us manipulate tons of data in an organized way. There is tools for managing your productivity needs, like spreadsheets or word processing. So there is some tools that they are compatible across different platforms. You can use pieces of word processing that have been created on another software, and you can use them freely. You can freely copy, you can freely see what the software does, and you can freely modify it to make it better, and then you can put it back, those improvements, into the community, so everybody gets the benefit. There are tools for managing projects, there are tools for processing video, processing audio, handling your email, storing data. Even all this webcast you're seeing is being done through a series of pieces of open source software. So everything from the video, the manipulation of the images, the audio, everything is done within free pieces of software. What was that's let's say in a nutshell what the open source is. So going back to our story, so as I mentioned before, we are entrepreneurs. We run a series of businesses for the last 15 years or so, and of course we have some good grasp of business process and technology, IT. So it was not so remote for us to understand how to adapt, how to utilize software that was not initially very popular. Yeah. Another reality that we were facing is that we were not, at least initially, very successful. So it means that we couldn't afford the commercial solutions that were available for all the needs we had. So let's say we needed to do our accounting, we needed to process our data, we needed to manipulate images, do video, do audio, a series of storing our documents, a natural series of needs that any company would have. So we were sort of struggling with our own budget to pay for the licenses to use every single piece of software we needed. So in 2006, this friend of mine introduced me personally to the open source and totally opened my eyes. So I found that I could, for almost every need I had, and for which we had been using commercial software, there was a pretty good open source alternative that didn't have restrictions, that even if we needed something special, we could develop it and add it to the application. So that's where, for instance, we started with the productivity tools. 1 year later, we started using even ERP. So we started processing all our transactions in a piece of free software, and that was the case of OpenBravo. And from there, we never looked back. And we started to add a series of different elements for our email, for our storing our data, for broadcasting our events, for absolutely everything. So today, 12 or 15 years later, we have an infrastructure that enable us, let's say, of course, we have a central pool of servers where all of our critical pieces of open source software are sitting, and in these servers we have installed many of these pieces I mentioned before, like OpenBravo, like project management, our software for storing centrally documents and being able to share those two among ourselves. I mean, our teams, with our customers, with our suppliers, with whoever needs to involve. Of course, we can exchange through emails. So we got to the point that our team is, first of all, fully mobile. So they mean they can work everywhere, even in territories that are restricted, because they can, if they are working, for instance, in some of these general embargo territories where American software cannot be used, or they are behind firewalls like in China, they can still use all our tools, because our tools are absolutely transparent. Everybody can see everybody can connect no matter where they are. We have a team that is globally deployed. So we have people in Asia, we have people in Latin America, in Europe, almost everywhere, and they can access the data from any device. So it means they can use the telephone, the computer, the laptop, and they can access all the information they need to operate. They can collaborate with their colleagues, with their suppliers, with any stakeholder. In minutes, we can create a new user, or if somebody joins the team, it can be up and running in minutes. I'm saying even hours. In a few minutes, that person will have account, access to all of the systems, and it will be absolutely connected with the entire ecosystem. All our critical data resides in our servers, so that means that the data is ours. And that's important when we compare with other services, for instance, where the data is actually sitting on somebody else's server or on anybody else's service provider. So you are depending on whether this organization does the proper backup, does the proper security measures so that your data is protected. So in our case, everything resides in servers that comply with our own requirements. So all the applications that are used by our team are all centrally managed, secure, and deployed. So it means that, of course, they can use other pieces of software as well, but the key pieces of software are all provided by us to our collaborators centrally. All our accounting for all our businesses that you saw in the previous slide, they are all done automatically. So it means every time something is invoiced or paid or purchased or any process happens, it leaves proper tracing in our systems, and they are properly backed and secured. We can mine our data, so it means that over the years we keep accumulating information about ourselves, about our customers, about suppliers. We can analyze this data in whatever way we want it, and the data is sitting with us, so that we don't depend on anybody to have access to this information, which means that we share only the information we want to share. We don't have all the other eyes looking at our information. So in terms of privacy, it's for some of the projects that might be sensitive, some of our communications might be absolutely confidential. Nothing of that is sitting on third-party servers or third-party service providers. Yeah? The whole ecosystem is easily scalable. So we started from a relatively small operation, but then we operate in many countries, in many currencies, in many different businesses, and we keep it's equivalent to just buying a bigger computer, and then you just transfer everything to the new one, and everything keeps growing. There is no issue that you hit the maximum of this or the maximum of that, and then you need to change to another technology. No, all technology we're using is super scalable, so it can, for instance, we have our own email server, which means that our emails are being stored and distributed through our own central server, and we can have one account, two accounts, 2,000 or 20,000 email accounts. There is no issue of hitting any limitation, right? Two important things to mention at the bottom here is that we have zero dependency on the parties. So it means that none of these services provided by anybody, even if it's for free. Sometimes we say, oh, I have an email account, it's for free. Yeah, it's free, but until they decide not to provide it with a service, and then you have a problem, or the data is sitting on somebody else, or you hit some threshold, and then it's not free anymore, or it's free the first account, but the second, the third, the fourth is not. This is not the case when you build your ecosystem based on intrinsically free software. Of course, we pay zero license fees because all the open source is actually, it also costs zero. It's not only free from freedom, it's also free for zero price. No? Well, the people say, oh, but then maybe your stakeholders, when they receive your documents or they see your website, they might find difference with what everybody else uses. It's not the case. So our stakeholders can access our website, can email and collaborate with us. And they can be even granted access to work in our system. They will not notice at all that all our infrastructure is 100% open source. They will only see a very professional and very organized ecosystem. I send an email, they reply. I want to send encrypted confidential information, they can do it. Would they need to collaborate in a project with our people, they get an account, they can participate, they can store documents, they can read documents. It's absolutely transparent for them. So what isn't it for you if you were interested in let's say getting into the open source? So first of all, you can slash out your software license. So whatever piece of software you use, you pay some money for it, or you pay with your freedom for it, or you contribute your data to someone you don't even know, you don't necessarily trust. Yeah? So if you move into open source applications, you will pay zero. You will be able to manipulate your data as you wish. You can analyze it, slice it, dice without any limitation. You can publish this output of how you analyze your data through the internet, put it on your website. You can do anything you want with it. Of course, if you do this, you will also, as you cut your cost, you will also be able to implement more tools that you will normally do if you have to pay for them. So it means that you will probably reach a much higher level of efficiency and paperless operation. So you don't need to have any more documents. You can script your process or your procedure so that everything goes from person A to person B, and without having to send any physical piece of paper. You eliminate, errors, redundancy, data loss, that is also very expensive. So if we don't provide good tools to our collaborators, to our employees, because we are trying to cut costs, so they end up using their own laptops, their own applications. They start storing documents in spreadsheets, thumb drives, and sooner or later we will face very, very expensive data losses, right? We will also avoid uninvited eyes and also predatory services that lock us into something. So like if they provide us something for free or something that looks cheap, but then we get locked into more expensive services, or we cannot use other services because we are locked into one provider or one platform, you would also be absolutely free of that. Yeah? So how could you get there? Okay, so this is more for companies that want to do this. Of course, as we learn through our own journey in the open source, we have accumulated like more than 10 years of experience, right? But our experience, of course, is very much linked to what we do. But if you want to explore these ideas in your own business setup, I mean, you need to bring your unique knowledge about your business. We combine it with what we know, and we can help you get into a new world where you can be free of all these problems, and that you can get high levels of efficiency, that you can have all your data secure, and then we build this new environment for you, or build it together, better saying. And then, of course, there's going to be some learning in the process. So the key people in your team will need to learn the new tools that they will come with this new environment. Nothing is too complicated, so it means that they will very quickly be very familiar and very comfortable, and you will see that most of the things in the open source have been designed for simplicity. They have been designed for optimizing the resources. So it means that because there are no hidden pieces of code just to make sure you pay this or you pay that, or to do some actions that are not needed. So if for give you an email, I need to, but my true intention is to read your email, to analyze your email, so I can send you advertisement. I will be spending a lot of effort in my code to do all that work. In this case, it will be just what you need to send an email. So all the pieces of software are normally a lot less cluttered, are a lot less burdened with things that you don't need, right? So once we implement all this, the benefits are all for you, right? So you will be in a new world, cheaper, happier, faster, more efficient. How normally a project like this happen, right? So it is you need to if you're interested in this, you need to see what's the final scope of where you want to get to, and there will be a phase in which you'll develop this new environment for your team. Of course, some phase of implementation. And then there will be an stabilization, which is when we make sure that we don't go back to the previous practices, or we make sure that everything works, and that's it. We're talking about weeks, not years or months. So I would say probably for a typical entrepreneur setup with it will be a project that it will take a few weeks, right? Maybe 2 months tops, and you will transfer from wherever you are today to a much better world. Okay, so that is about it, what I had to tell you about our story and what the open source is. This was the first of this series, and now we're going. It will be more, and I hope we can cover many other topics more profound, more in detail about different applications, different uses, specific questions that you guys might send or ask. But but we're gonna go now into a series of Q&A. So we are logging your questions from wherever you can, from Facebook or maybe YouTube. But we're taking your questions, and we will try to address them here live. But if it was not possible because of time or whatever, or you got disconnected and need to send your question later, of course we will take offline any other questions as well. Okay, so I will start. For you, please post any question you have in the through Facebook or YouTube, for whichever of the platforms you are actually connected to this meeting today. Okay, so let me see what we have. Okay, we have a question from Daniela. She said, is this only for business? Can I use this at home? Daniela, thanks for your question. No, this is not only for business. Of course, you can use it at home. In practice, most of people normally enter into the open source for the from home. It was my personal case as well. When I first heard of the open source, I started to use I use it for productivity. So I removed my proprietary spreadsheets and word processors, and I started using the open source version of them. I found them very effective, cool, light. And that's how I started to move more and more into this. So the short answer is definitely, it's not only for business, it's also for home. And we will have more webcasts in the next weeks, in which we will touch some of the, I would say, entry-level applications that you could use at home very easily. And start to be more comfortable about this new world of the open source. Thanks. Okay, we have here from Frederick. Who pays for all this? Yeah, that's a good question. It comes all the time, Frederick. The open source is a collaboration platform. That means that behind each of these projects, we can call them projects because they don't really end, they keep improving. There are communities. So it means that, let's say, there are people who's got an interest on a particular need. Let's say it's an artist, he needs some design, but they also are software developers. So they join this, and they, over the years, contribute to make it better and better and better. So which means that the community fund this by themselves, by providing time to it. And you will see it as you get into this world. Initially, we all get into this as users, and which means that we provide feedback. Every time we have a problem, we say, "Oh, how do I do this?" or "How can we do this in this way?" And somebody takes this idea and actually implements it in the software, right? And if you are more interested in programming, eventually you start making also contributions to the software. So in a way, that is your way to paying back, which is paying back with your feedback, paying back with your ideas, or paying back with your work. Or this is on an individual level. At commercial level, many of these applications are actually for business use, or they are email servers, they are website servers, or ERP accounting systems. So they are corporations of business that need something, and they are prepared to contribute hours of work to make something happen. So you will see that behind all these communities, there are also corporations that contribute money, time, and effort to develop them and make them better for everyone, right? So that's how it's all paid. It's paid out of the same community of users. What else you have here? Josephine, what is the problem with other free services, Google, Dropbox, Drive, etc.? I wouldn't say there is any problem. I mean, there are some of those services are great. It's not that they are problematic. Yeah, but the thing is that in the philosophy of freedom, many of these services, they come as with a catch, which is that you don't really know what is going on behind. So if I give you a piece of software and I don't tell you what it does, and you sign up to certain conditions in which you volunteer your data, your information, that is for some people very dangerous, right? So I mean, probably to a certain degree for me is as well, otherwise I wouldn't be here. But it doesn't mean that everybody needs to stop using these services. No, come on, these services are also great. Yeah, but they come with this catch, which is that while they are free to use, you are not free to see what they do. You are not free to copy them. You are not free to modify them. So that it could be problematic for some people, right? So that is what is behind why the whole movement of open source actually exists, because many of the people in the open source community or the free software community, they don't trust this corporation or governments or abusive governments that eventually may do something wrong with all this information. But that all depends of the opinion of each person, okay? So there's nothing wrong with those services. I'm not saying that the services are wrong or they are a problem, but they definitely are not totally transparent about what they do with the information you volunteer to them. That's where the potential problem might be. Okay, we have one more question here from Li Ming. Li Ming's, apologies if I read your name incorrectly, Li Ming. You mentioned audio production. What is this? What about video production? Okay, yes, there are applications for audio production, which means that, and they are very solid, and some of them are commercially used by professional production studios. Yes, so you can have a workstation. If you are asking this question, I presume you are a musician or you like to edit music or something like that. So you can have like a workstation in which you can have your audio tracks, and then you can process them, apply different effects, and put multi-tracks together, like in the normal way that you record any song, which means that you normally do it instrument by instrument, voice by voice, and then you blend all together in a final piece of work. No? For doing that is what we call we call this type of software audio processing workstation or something like that. In the open source community, there's no one. There's a few. Probably the most famous is Ardor. It's super solid and it's free. You can contribute. There is a very active community behind it. So if probably we're going to have a webcast later about this application because it's very, very powerful. Yep. So then also you mentioned yes, about video production. Yes, there is several applications for making videos, from cameras, from mix that with audio. You can do animation as well. One of the most famous animation software is actually open source, which is there are tools for doing all these things, like making movies, making animations, even making broadcast. I mean, what we are broadcasting today is also an open source application that is called Open Broadcaster Studio. So yes, there are tools for audio, video, and movies. Okay, I think I'll take one more question now, and then we probably need to close for today. But somebody asked me about license. Julie, it says that I've heard about license and concept like copyleft. What is this? Okay, remember we were talking about the open source as a concept that existed from the beginning of humanity. So this is the way we normally collaborate as human beings. Then later we created concepts like patents or license. Those are modern concepts that we created in order to organize our society. So there is a very old open source concept, which is what we call the public domain. So the public domain is a type of license. So it means that when something is public domain, the user has the right to use without paying anything some piece of work. That's for instance how we can use very old pieces of literature, and we don't need to pay the license to the author, and maybe we don't even know who the author is if we are talking about very old pieces of literature, right? This is where something becomes public domain, which means that everybody can use. But the public domain doesn't have any restrictions. So it means that I can take a piece of public domain, I can modify something, and I can enclose it and I sell it as mine, because there is no restriction in the public domain license for me to modify a piece of work and sell it, right, as a closed piece of work. I can, without seeing what is inside. So when these people in the 70s, 80s started to think about the worries of having a lot of software in an enclosed license, they came up with the concept of the copyleft, which are the basic of the modern, the license behind the open source community. The concept of copyleft is that, so all open source license, including public domain or whatever, it will allow you to use something for free. It will allow you to copy it. It will allow you to distribute it. It will allow you to modify it. But the ones that have this copyleft concept inside, they force you to release whatever modification you do to this, let's say, to this work that you took, and you need to release it in the same free way to your users. So it means that if we take a piece of open source code that has a copyleft license, which means I have the license to use, I have the license to modify it, but once I modify it, I cannot close it anymore, because by the let's say restrictions of the license, if I use it, I need to keep it open. So in that way, it's guaranteed that a piece of software remain open forever. So it will continue to carry the benefit after I contributed to it. So I cannot take a piece of free software, change a couple of things, and then say, no, now it's mine, and then I close it. No, I cannot. I can add it, modify it, but the new derivative work that came with the combination of the original with my contributions have to remain open. That's the concept of copyleft. There are several licenses that include that. I don't think that's beyond this talk, but that is what enables that a piece of free software can remain free in the long run, and we continue to be used for many people after the original contributors. Okay. All right. So I think that's all we can do today in matter of time. Thanks for your question. Thanks for joining, and I invite you to come again. We have this type of webcast every 2 weeks, and we will start digging into some of the pieces of software you see behind me for the different applications, for audio, for how I migrate into Linux, if this is a good idea, when it's a good idea, when it's not. You will have plenty of opportunities to get to know a lot more about the open source and what tools are there for you to use. And of course, if you need any help to that, you can write direct to us, and we will give you a heads up of how to get into any piece of software that can help for your needs. So I hope I didn't bore you too much, and I hope we can have you again in a couple of weeks. So thanks a lot, and goodbye.